Be me, 28-year-old Camila, HR director. Wake up every morning with righteous purpose burning in chest. Today's the day I make real change happen. Check my phone for overnight reports from our new workplace monitoring system. 3 incidents logged already. Smile.exe loading. Arrive at office 7:30 a.m. sharp. Walk through open floor plan like I'm surveying my domain. Notice Brad from accounting sitting 2 desks away from Jennifer. Pull out measuring tape from purse. Excuse me, Brad, you're currently 4.2 feet from Jennifer. Company policy clearly states minimum 6-foot distance. Brad looks confused. But I've sat here for 3 years. Not anymore, you haven't. Call emergency meeting with all department heads. PowerPoint presentation ready. Breathable boundaries. Creating safe spaces. Slide 1. Shows cartoon lungs with angry red X. Gentlemen and ladies, we have a breathing problem. Confused murmurs around conference table. Male, respiratory patterns create microaggressions through shared air particles. Marketing director Dave raises hand. Camila, are you saying men can't breathe near women? I'm saying uncontrolled male respiration in feminine proximity creates hostile work environment. Spend next hour explaining new proximity protocols. All male employees must maintain minimum 6-foot distance from female colleagues. Breath holding required when passing women in hallways. Specialized breathing masks available for men who refuse compliance. Installation of air purification systems around women's workstations. Zero tolerance policy for breathing violations. Immediate termination for repeat offenses. Watch their faces during presentation. Some look angry, others bewildered. This is exactly the resistance I expected from patriarchal power structures. They just don't understand how revolutionary this is. Finally, real protection for women in workspace. First week of implementation goes smoothly. Only had to write up Matthew from IT for exhaling too loudly near reception desk. Sarah from accounting thanks me personally. I feel so much safer knowing men can't contaminate my workspace. Validation feels incredible. This is what progress looks like. Month 2 brings first major incident. Kevin from sales literally holding his breath while delivering quarterly reports to female department head turns blue halfway through presentation. Collapses during profit margin analysis. Paramedics called. Write him up anyway for creating disruption. Policy clearly states breath holding is personal responsibility. Start getting complaints from male employees. They claim policy is discriminatory and impossible to follow. Obviously, they're not trying hard enough. Implement breathing schedule system. Men can only breathe during designated 15-minute intervals. Must leave building during breathing breaks to avoid contaminating female colleagues. Genius solution that addresses everyone's concerns. Productivity mysteriously starts declining. Several major clients complain about missed deadlines. Male employees frequently absent from desk during crucial meetings. Some quit without notice. Clearly they weren't committed to creating inclusive environment. Company better off without their toxic masculinity anyway. 6 months later, things escalating. Caught Derek from engineering breathing while walking past women's bathroom. Immediate termination despite his protests about basic human needs. This is insane, Camila. People have to breathe to live. Maybe think about that before choosing to be born male, Derek. Security escorts him out while he's literally hyperventilating. Start receiving formal complaints filed with corporate headquarters. Ignore them, obviously. They don't understand the importance of this work. Revolution always faces resistance from oppressive systems. Schedule company-wide meeting to address misunderstandings. Mandatory attendance for all employees. Prepare. Comprehensive presentation about importance of atmospheric safety. Arrive to conference room full of angry faces, mostly men looking aggressive and entitled as usual. Few women seem uncomfortable too, but probably just internalized misogyny. Begin presentation, but immediately interrupted. Thomas from legal stands up. Camila, Can we talk privately before this meeting continues? Refuse initially, but other department heads insist. Agree to brief sidebar conversation, thinking I can educate him about policy benefits. Thomas leads me to smaller conference room, joined by Michael from HR compliance and James from operations. They sit across from me with serious expressions. Camila, we need to discuss some concerns about current workplace policies. Immediately defensive. If this is about Derek, he violated clear breathing protocols. Thomas pulls out thick folder. We've received 47 formal complaints in past month. 3 employees hospitalized for oxygen deprivation. 2 sexual harassment lawsuits filed against company. 7 clients threatening to terminate contracts. Obviously, they're exaggerating to undermine my authority. Those numbers don't reflect the positive impact on female employees. Michael leans forward. Camila, 5 women have also filed complaints. They say the policy makes them feel uncomfortable and isolated. Impossible. Women love feeling protected from male contamination. James opens his laptop. Can you walk us through your reasoning for these policies? Finally, opportunity to explain revolutionary thinking. Spend 20 minutes detailing atmospheric oppression theory, how male breathing patterns assert dominance through shared oxygen, scientific basis for respiratory contamination concerns. When I finish, long silence. Thomas looks genuinely confused. Camila, where did you develop these theories? Through careful observation and research into workplace dynamics. What specific research? Suddenly feel less confident. Most of my conclusions came from personal observations and feelings. Michael asks different approach. Can you help me understand something personal? My daughter just started kindergarten. Should I be concerned about her breathing around male classmates? Deflect with workplace-specific arguments. That's different. We're talking about professional environment. But breathing is breathing, right? Uncomfortable with direction of questioning. Adult male respiratory patterns carry different implications. James jumps in. What implications specifically? Starting to feel attacked by their constant questions. Why can't they just accept the policy benefits? Thomas tries different approach. Camila, I want to share something with you. Tells story about his son Matthew, who has severe asthma. How holding breath for extended periods could literally kill him. Describes watching his child struggle for air during attacks. Something about his tone makes me actually listen. When Derek collapsed during that presentation, it reminded me of Matthew during bad asthma episode. The terror in his eyes, gasping for air. I kept thinking about how afraid he must have been. Never considered breathing policies from medical perspective. Feel slight uncertainty creeping in. Michael shares his own story, talks about working construction before college, how physical labor alongside women never involved breathing restrictions, describes mutual respect and teamwork in challenging environment. Some of my best professional relationships were with female colleagues. We trusted each other with our lives, literally. James talks about his military service, mixed gender units operating in life or death situations. When you're in combat, you don't think about who's breathing what. You think about keeping everyone alive. The person next to you might save your life regardless of gender. Starting to feel defensive again, but also confused. That's different. Those are extreme circumstances. This is about everyday workplace comfort and safety. Thomas nods thoughtfully. You're right. Those are extreme circumstances. But what about normal circumstances? Like when my wife and I work together in our garden. Should I hold my breath when we're planting flowers? Question catches me off guard. Never thought about breathing policies in personal relationships. That's between you and your wife. But you work with your wife, right? Your colleagues in running your household. Logic feels twisted but can't identify the flaw. Why does this feel different from workplace policies? Michael asks about my own relationships. Do you have male friends, Camila? Some, yes, but that's personal, not professional. Do you ask them to hold their breath around you? Of course not. That would be ridiculous, but can't explain why workplace should be different. James pulls out his phone, shows picture of his team from last project. Mixed group of men and women working closely together, all smiling, clearly comfortable with each other. This was taken during 16-hour workday solving critical system failure. Everyone breathing in same room for entire day. Most productive and collaborative work I've ever done. Stare at photo longer than intended. Something about their genuine smiles bothers me. They look happy. When was the last time I saw employees looking happy at work? Push down uncomfortable thoughts. Anecdotal evidence doesn't override systemic concerns. Thomas leans back in chair. Camila, can I ask about your own work experience? Before implementing these policies, did you feel unsafe because of male breathing? Think back to previous jobs. Honestly, can't remember specific incidents involving respiratory threats. It's not about specific incidents. It's about cumulative atmospheric pressure. What does that feel like exactly? Struggle to articulate specific feelings. Mostly remember feeling generally uncomfortable around certain male colleagues. But was that really about breathing? Maybe about communication styles or personality conflicts? It's subtle but persistent sense of contamination. Michael asks follow-up. When did you first notice these feelings? Try to remember earliest awareness of breathing-related discomfort. Realizing most memories involve feeling dismissed or unheard in meetings, not necessarily connected to anyone's respiratory patterns. It developed gradually over time. James suggests different perspective. What if those feelings were about communication rather than breathing? Like being interrupted or having ideas dismissed. Those are real workplace problems that deserve solutions. Feel defensive surge. You're minimizing the atmospheric component, but privately wondering if there's something to his suggestion. Remember feeling frustrated when Derek interrupted my presentations, but he also interrupted everyone, regardless of gender. Was my response really about his breathing or about feeling unheard? Quickly dismiss these doubts. Can't start questioning entire theoretical foundation. Thomas changes subject again. Can you help me understand the policy implementation process? Did you consult with other HR professionals or medical experts about respiratory health? Realize I developed policies mostly independently, based on personal observations and feelings. Sometimes revolutionary ideas require independent thinking. But what about unintended consequences? Michael shows chart of productivity decline since policy implementation. Employee satisfaction scores hitting record lows. Several department heads requesting transfers. These numbers suggest something isn't working. Feel anger rising again. Change is always difficult for established power structures. Of course, there's resistance to progressive policies. That doesn't mean we should abandon important protections, but looking at data makes me uncomfortable. Numbers don't usually lie. James asks direct question. Camila, do you think Derek deserved to lose his job for breathing while walking? Immediate defensive response. He violated clearly stated policy. Rules apply equally to everyone. But thinking about Derek's face when security escorted him out, he looked genuinely confused and hurt, not entitled or aggressive. Derek has 3 kids and a mortgage, Thomas says quietly. His wife is dealing with cancer treatment. He was walking to bathroom, not threatening anyone. Information hits differently than expected. Never considered personal circumstances of policy violations, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. I didn't know about his wife. That doesn't change the policy violation, but voice lacks previous conviction, starting to see Derek as person rather than abstract policy violator. Makes me deeply uncomfortable. Michael suggests short break, Step outside conference room into hallway. Notice immediate difference in workplace atmosphere. Male employees clustered near exit doors during breathing breaks. Female employees sitting alone at desks. Nobody interacting naturally with anyone. Remember, this floor used to buzz with collaborative energy. Cross-departmental teams working together. Spontaneous brainstorming sessions. Now everything feels segregated and tense. Women seem as isolated as men. This wasn't supposed to happen. Return to room feeling less certain. Thomas continues conversation gently. What outcome were you hoping for with these policies? Protection for female employees, obviously. Are women safer now? Think about Sarah from accounting thanking me initially, but haven't heard from her lately. Yes, they're protected from atmospheric contamination. But are they happier? Uncomfortable question. Happiness isn't the primary goal. Safety is. James pulls out employee survey results. Women reporting increased isolation and workplace tension, several requesting. Transfers to different departments. These are the women we're supposed to be protecting. Stare at survey data longer than intended. Comments about feeling separated from colleagues. Unable to form normal working relationships. Workplace feels hostile and unnatural. This contradicts everything I expected. Maybe they need time to adjust to safer environment. Michael shares another personal story, talks about his grandmother who worked in factory during World War II, alongside men in dangerous conditions. She always said gender didn't matter when you had important work to do. People were just people trying to do their jobs well. Some were jerks, some were wonderful, regardless of gender. Something about his grandmother's perspective resonates. Remember my own grandmother's stories about workplace cooperation. She never mentioned breathing-related concerns, focused on mutual respect and professional competence. That was a different era with different awareness. But, feeling less convinced by my own arguments, Thomas asks thoughtful question. What does an ideal workplace look like to you? Describe vision of female employees feeling safe and valued, able to contribute without atmospheric interference. Men understanding impact of their respiratory presence. Everyone following clear protocols for interaction. That sounds lonely, James observes, like people working in separate bubbles. Is connection not part of workplace satisfaction? Never considered connection as positive workplace element, always focused on protection and separation. Michael suggests thought experiment. Imagine you're working on critical project with tight deadline. You need expertise from one colleague to solve technical problem, but policy requires him to hold breath during consultation. How does that serve the project or your professional development? Realize I've never worked closely with male colleagues since implementing policies. Avoided collaborative. Projects requiring cross-gender teamwork. Assumed this protected me from various forms of contamination, but also meant missing learning opportunities and professional growth. Feel tears starting unexpectedly. I just wanted women to feel safe. Voice cracking slightly. I wanted to create environment where we weren't constantly under threat. Surprised by emotional response. Usually maintain professional composure during policy discussions. Thomas hands me tissues. That's a worthy goal, Camilla. But maybe we can find ways to achieve safety without eliminating basic human interaction. What if safety comes through mutual respect rather than physical separation? Concept feels foreign but intriguing. James shares story about his daughter's science teacher, man who inspired her passion for chemistry. She wouldn't have discovered her career path without his mentorship. Should she miss those opportunities because he's male? Or should we focus on ensuring mentorship remains appropriate and professional, thinking about my own career development? Some of my most valuable learning came from male supervisors, professors who challenged my thinking, colleagues who shared different perspectives. Would breathing restrictions have improved or hindered those relationships? Michael returns to practical concerns. Derek's termination is being reviewed by corporate. They're questioning the legal basis for breathing-related firings. We might face wrongful termination lawsuit. Company could be held liable for discriminatory practices. Reality of legal consequences hitting harder than expected. The policy applies equally to all male employees. That's not discrimination. Actually, it might be gender-based discrimination. Thomas explains legal precedents. Policies targeting specific gender characteristics could violate employment law. Feeling walls closing in, months of careful policy development potentially illegal, professional reputation at stake. But women deserve protection from atmospheric contamination. Hearing own words, they sound less scientific than before, more like personal preference than objective policy. James asks crucial question. Can you point to specific research supporting atmospheric contamination theory or studies showing respiratory-based workplace harassment? Realize most of my theoretical foundation came from personal feelings, extrapolated into company-wide policies without scientific backing. The research is emerging. Emerging from where? Pressure building in chest. From careful observation of workplace dynamics. What specific observations? Struggle to identify concrete examples. Mostly remember feeling uncomfortable in various situations. Assumed discomfort came from breathing-related factors. Thomas suggests different interpretation. What if discomfort came from communication style differences? Or personality conflicts that had nothing to do with gender? Or normal workplace stress that everyone experiences? Possibilities I never considered. Always attributed negative feelings to gender-specific atmospheric issues. Michael shows me exit interview data from departed male employees, quotes about feeling dehumanized and treated like contamination source, unable to function normally in professional environment. Policies created hostile work environment. Reading their words triggers unexpected empathy. Remember Derek's confused expression during termination. He wasn't angry or entitled, just genuinely bewildered by losing job for basic biological function. But policy violations require consistent enforcement. Voice sounds weaker than intended, starting to question entire enforcement framework. James asks about policy development process. Did you pilot test these policies in smaller group? Or gradually implement with feedback periods? Realize I pushed through changes quickly, assumed resistance meant policies were working, never considered they might be fundamentally flawed. Revolutionary changes require bold implementation, but remembering employee responses differently now. Maybe confusion and distress weren't signs of patriarchal resistance. Maybe they indicated genuinely problematic policies. Possibility makes me nauseous. Thomas shifts to personal approach again. Camila, you're clearly passionate about workplace equity. That's admirable and important. But what if there are better ways to achieve those goals? Ways that bring people together rather than separating them? Feeling emotional walls starting to crack. I don't know other ways. Admitting uncertainty feels terrifying. Everything I read suggested atmospheric separation was necessary for safety. What did you read specifically? Can't cite specific sources. Mostly personal blogs and opinion pieces that confirmed my existing feelings. Michael asks about my personal relationships again. Do you enjoy spending time with male friends and family? Do you feel threatened by their breathing in social settings? Of course not. That would be absurd. Why is workplace different? Struggle to articulate distinction that previously seemed obvious. Realizing workplace policies created environment I wouldn't tolerate in personal life. Would never ask male friends to hold breath during conversations. Would find such requests bizarre and offensive. Why did professional setting justify different standards? Tears flowing more freely now. I thought I was protecting people. I thought I was creating safer workplace. But everyone seems miserable and isolated. James hands me more tissues. Sometimes good intentions can lead to harmful outcomes. Thomas asks gentle question. What would you do differently if you could start over? Overwhelming question. Months of policy development and implementation. Careers disrupted, trust destroyed. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe start by talking to employees, Michael suggests. Ask what would make them feel safer and more valued. Include everyone in conversation, not just women. Find solutions that build community rather than dividing it. Concept of inclusive solution finding feels revolutionary. Spent so much energy creating protective barriers, never considered collaborative approach to workplace improvement. What if they just want to maintain status quo? What if they give real insight into building better workplace for everyone? James shares final story, talks about team building exercise where employees worked together on challenging project. Mixed gender groups collaborating intensively. Best workplace culture I ever experienced. People supported each other regardless of gender, focused on shared goals rather than perceived differences. Vision of collaborative workplace appeals to me, but conflicts with everything I thought I knew about gender dynamics. How do you ensure women's safety in that environment? Through clear communication, mutual respect, and addressing specific problems as they arise, not through blanket restrictions on basic human functions. Spending next hour discussing alternative approaches. Anti-harassment training focused on behavior rather than biology. Conflict resolution systems addressing actual problems. Mentorship programs promoting positive cross-gender professional relationships. Policies protecting everyone from genuine workplace harassment. Gradually understanding difference between protection and isolation, between safety and segregation. My policies created workplace where nobody could form authentic professional relationships, especially harmed the women I intended to protect. Feeling overwhelming shame about Derek's termination. Man lost job for walking to bathroom. Family struggling with medical bills didn't deserve additional financial stress. Can we rehire Derek? That depends on corporate review and his willingness to return. Realize I need to personally apologize to every affected employee, acknowledge policy failures, and commit to collaborative solutions. Process feels terrifying, but necessary. What if they don't forgive me? Focus on making things right rather than on personal comfort. Thomas suggests starting with company-wide meeting. Acknowledge policy problems publicly. Invite employee input on creating better workplace culture. Demonstrate commitment to inclusive rather than divisive solutions. Hands shaking at thought of public admission of failure. I was so convinced I was right, sobbing now without restraint. I thought I was protecting women from real threats. I made everyone miserable and destroyed workplace culture. How did I get everything so wrong? Michael explains how good intentions can create blind spots. Passion for justice sometimes leads to extreme solutions. Importance of testing theories against reality. Seeking input from affected communities before implementing major changes. James emphasizes learning opportunity. Everyone makes mistakes in leadership roles. What matters is how you respond when you realize problems. This could become positive turning point for company culture. Possibility of redemption feels both hopeful and overwhelming. Spending next 2 hours planning policy reversal, immediate suspension of breathing restrictions, reinstatement process for terminated employees, comprehensive review of all gender-related workplace policies, employee feedback sessions to develop collaborative solutions, drafting personal apology letters to each affected employee, especially Derek and his family, acknowledging specific harms caused by my policies, committing to better decision-making processes going forward. Words feel inadequate, but necessary. Planning company-wide presentation for next week. Will publicly acknowledge policy failures, explain learning process and commitment to inclusive solutions, invite employee participation in developing better workplace culture. Terrified but determined to make amends, walking back to my office feeling emotionally drained. Notice employees still maintaining artificial distances, women working in isolation from male colleagues, atmosphere of tension and separation. My policies created workplace prison for everyone. Derek's empty desk particularly painful to see. Family photo still sitting there from when he was escorted out. His kids smiling up from frame. Wife who's battling cancer. Consequences of my rigid policy enforcement suddenly very real. Sit at desk drafting resignation letter. Maybe best thing for company is my departure. Allow someone else to rebuild workplace culture. But then remember Thomas's words about learning from mistakes. Perhaps staying and fixing problems shows more integrity. Decide to stay and work on solutions, even if process is uncomfortable and humbling. Even if employees don't immediately forgive policy mistakes. Rebuilding trust requires presence and consistent effort. End of day, walking through office one final time. Imagining workplace where people collaborate naturally, where protection comes through mutual respect rather than physical barriers, where women feel valued for contributions rather than separated for safety. Tomorrow will begin long process of rebuilding. Starting with genuine apologies and policy reversals. Continuing with collaborative development of inclusive workplace culture, learning to lead through connection rather than division. Realize this experience taught me difference between equity and separation, between protection and isolation, between good intentions and effective solutions. Most importantly, between listening to my own assumptions and listening to actual people. Maybe Derek will give company another chance. Maybe workplace culture can become stronger through this process. Maybe learning from mistakes makes better leader than never making them. Tomorrow's meeting will determine if redemption is possible. Driving home. Thinking about conversation with grandmother tonight. Want to hear her stories about workplace cooperation again. Understand how she navigated professional relationships without breathing restrictions. Learn from her experience building mutual respect across gender lines. Tonight, we'll prepare for tomorrow's reckoning. Acknowledging failures publicly and committing to collaborative solutions. Beginning long journey toward authentic workplace equity, based on connection rather than separation, inclusion rather than isolation, respect for everyone's humanity.